Well, one of the other big stories this past week was people paying attention to the Chinese open weight models, open source models. There was a significant letter that was signed by NVIDIA and 24 other companies wanting to allow open weights models to be available to US businesses. I guess the Trump administration is considering whether they want to ban those models. Notably absent from the signers of that list were OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google. I guess all three of those being
Right.
likely beneficiaries if open weight models are not made available. I think we've been discussing whether these open weight models, whether they're Chinese or American, having some impact on revenue and margins for the big LLMs. Do you think people are kind of, again, trying to keep an eye on costs, and maybe if they can get the efficiency of open weight models at a much lower cost, they're more likely to use them as long as there's not national security concerns, right?
I think it is notable that this is, I think, Jensen's first time on Twitter, or maybe it's his first post in a while where he's,
Right. Yes, it was his first tweet, I think. Big sort of announcement there.
I give him credit for putting himself out there on this issue. And as he said, the ones who didn't sign the letter were OpenAI and Anthropic. They have a vested interest in keeping a lid on any kind of open source or open weight model. So I expect them to be on the other side of this. And then Google, I think, is actually a big beneficiary of open source and open weight, but they're also the biggest shareholder of Anthropic. So maybe they're trying to keep their politically, they don't really want to take one side or the other. I think what is happening is Anthropic is pushing hard to ban open source models because they want government protection for their business. And some of it is safety related. And we talked a bit about last week about whether if Chinese models have been engaged in something called distillation, you take someone else's model, you fire it up, you ask it a question, you use that to inform and train your own models. This happens all the time. We did this at eBay when we were trying to build a search engine. We took Google's search engine, we looked for, what's listing on eBay, how it works, how it doesn't work, and try to use it to improve our models. If Chinese models are doing that, that seems like that's just par for the course. I think we would all benefit if we had a more open source set of competitors. It would be cheaper for a lot of their customers. It would mean that Anthropic and OpenAI would have to compete harder for what they have. So it's beneficial for the ecosystem, just as it was in the 1990s. I hope the Trump administration is thinking about this the right way and sort of solving for the big picture here.
Do you think that there are legitimate American open weight competitors that are also going to be here, or is this only being dominated by Chinese options?
I don't know. If you believe what I believe, which is we need a strong, healthy, open source ecosystem to maximize innovation, you would think there would be, and there's a business in there. You would think that a lot of American companies would be in the game. So far, the ones we've been talking about are all Chinese, whether it's DeepSeek or Kimi or Moonshot. And I suspect a big part of the reason is if you're an American, it's the same reason why Americans don't play soccer very well on the international stage. Like if you're an American athlete, you don't really want to play soccer, right? You play football or basketball or baseball. I guess if you're an American AI engineer, you're like, I want to go work for OpenAI or Anthropic or Google. I can get paid better, maybe 11 Labs, maybe someone like that.
I think Reflection AI is probably the leading US company that's doing an open weights model.
Meta was in the horse race early with Llama, but that Llama has been running like a llama against thoroughbred racehorses. They don't seem to be. So I feel like I'm hoping that there will be an American heavyweight player. Open weight and open source are very important. I keep saying open source and open weight interchangeably. In reality, open source is something more specific. It's transparency across the entire supply chain, including access to the training code and the blueprints and the data curation technologies and licensing frameworks. Open weight is really just the numerical parameters. A lot of these companies that we like Alibaba's Quen or Moonshot, Kimi, they have zero visibility into the exact training data or pre-training pipeline. So it's really, you just get a black box, but it is open weight. I think it'd be beneficial if American companies got into the game, but so far it doesn't seem to be like there's a lot of them there. So we'll have to see how that goes.
That's working.
There we go. Come on, Jackie.
A little eye flutter. Hello, fella.
Morning, sunshine.
We missed you.
Well, a lot of people are waiting to hear what happens with the Anthropic's IPO. We talked about this last week. No disclosures of the financials just yet, but it seems like Anthropic is talking to bankers, Morgan Stanley, Goldman, JP Morgan, about an offering in Q4, possibly as soon as October. I think they're trying to get ahead of not just rival OpenAI, but also DeepSeek, which is announcing that they're probably going to do an IPO as well. Ahmad, what do you think is happening with the situation for Anthropic revenue?
I was thinking about this over the weekend. Like, why haven't we seen more from these guys? Is it concerning? Because here's what they've told us officially. At the end of May, within a couple of days at the end of the month, they told us they're at 47 billion in ARR. That was official. Before that, there were 30 billion at the end of April. So they added 17 billion in that 1 month. At the end of the June, you would think, well, they ought to be pretty quick to tell us how they're doing if they're raising money, and they should be north of 60, but they kind of went all quiet. And I was like, what does that mean? And then it kind of dawned on me, well, if they're raising an IPO in October, they're on the road right now, confidentially, with their filings. When you go on the road show, lawyers tell you, what are you going to
Can't
show
be
investors?
reporting. Yeah.
Yeah, or they'll tell you, give me your deck, give me your pitch, give me your prospectus. Don't change a word unless you go through a legal process to change that one word. So if you're on the road and you had a new number, even though that's relevant, you can't disclose the new number without going through a legal review and maybe pausing a roadshow. So I think they're just telling us, hey, the end of May, we're at 47 billion. We can't tell you where we were at the end of June because, we're in this legal quiet period. There is a source, though. I don't really know how, to be honest, how credible the source is, but Ticker Trends and Yipit Data do a tracker. They're trying to estimate revenue for Anthropic, and it is for OpenAI as well. Now, it's not official. They don't have access to Anthropic's internal accounting ledgers, but they're using proxy signals like web traffic and API usage logs and maybe search intent and app downloads and engagement to figure out, hey, what do we look like? And it seems like from their estimate, they're at 74 billion in ARR, and that's as of July 22nd. So they're definitely growing. They've definitely added considerable ARR just in the past, month or so. This is a comparison to OpenAI. If they're at 74 billion, Anthropic is, OpenAI has been adding as well, but growing at a much slower rate, probably more like 2x since the start of the year. Anthropic is up 7x since the start of the year. So OpenAI is maybe 40 billion in ARR. And if you believe that to be where they are, then I would say Anthropic is definitely on track for an IPO in Q4. They're likely going to be growing at 10x year over year, close to 100 billion by the end of the year, probably profitable. That's more than enough to go public at a couple of trillion value. I don't know about OpenAI. That might be a little bit more of a tough putt in a crowded market, but I would say odds are very good for Anthropic, and that's maybe 50-50 for OpenAI.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we can rely on these alternative sources for revenue, but I think it's generally perceived that there's some kind of pressure on Anthropic revenue, again, from these open source, open weight models, from, Brian Armstrong at Coinbase saying, hey, we need to curb our costs. So I think there's at least some concern or speculation that continued uptick in revenue acceleration might be coming back down to earth at least a little bit. Certainly seems like they're going to be able to get to a pretty big number when they do that filing.
I would think that $74 billion number is not that far off, and maybe a month off, but I think by October, November, they'll be close to that. I would say actually one other thing really helped their IPO this week. I would take my odds up considerably as of what happened this week. This class action settlement with thousands of authors and publishers was a $1.5 billion payment. They basically admitted that they had been using information, I won't say pirated books, but maybe I would say without getting the permission from all these copyright holders. They took information to train their models and then didn't compensate them. And the class action, the lawsuit that came back, actually had two very important holdings. One was, the way you got about the data, you went about getting the data was illegal. Like you should have done a better job of securing those permissions. But the other part of the ruling was you can use data in order to train your models as long as you don't lift someone's, exact words and use it and pass it off as your own. And that's part of fair use. And that was a little bit controversial going in, but the judge really sidelined the IPO. If they had gone the other way and said, hey, this is not fair use, you now have to go back and get permission from all these different copyright holders, that could have really sidelined the IPO. So I think Anthropic kind of dodged a bullet here. And I think this clears the way for a much smoother IPO. This would have been like a top 3 question on the roadshow before this ruling, like, hey, what's going on with your copyright users? And now I think the focus is on business results, Chinese open weight models or open weight models in general coming to get you, and is there enough demand to justify? And this takes one potentially significant issue off the table. So it's probably a good week for Anthropic.